Cryptic clues. Cryptic clues. Cryptic clues.
Welcome to my channel, where every mystery draws you deeper, every case sharpens your instincts, and every clue takes us closer to the truth. In today's case, we follow Miss Marple as she uncovers a puzzle not written on paper, not whispered in conversation, and not left out in plain sight. It was hidden in something ordinary, a simple teaspoon, marked with an impossible bite. Stay with me till the end, because the truth behind this peculiar clue isn't just surprising, it's unsettling. So, pour yourself a cup of tea and settle in, because Miss Marple and the teaspoon with a bite mark is a case worth every second until the very end. Chapter 1. The garden parties preludeth morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of St. Mary Mead's village hall, casting a hunted glow across the polished wooden tables and gleaming silverware. Beyond the open doors, the air carried the scent of freshly mown grass and burgeoning roses, their petals a tapestry of cream and blush. Villagers arrived in pairs and small clusters, ladies in floral frocks, with parasols tucked beneath delicate arms, gentlemen in tweed jackets tipping straw boaters in polite greeting. Children, cheeks flushed with excitement, darted among the flower beds, clutching wicker baskets laden with cucumber sandwiches and ribbon-wrapped cakes. At the heart of the gathering stood Miss Jane Marple, knitting needles glinting as they clicked against each other in a soft, rhythmic accompaniment to the morning's chatter. Her slender frame, draped in a demure navy dress, was an island of calm amidst the animated swirl of activity. Beneath the brim of her straw hat, her pale eyes measured every gesture and exchanged glance, stirring each detail in the recesses of her mind. To a casual observer, she seemed little more than an amiable old lady enjoying the festivities. To those who knew her, she was an unseen sentinel, ever vigilant for the slightest deviation from the village's habitual tranquility. Reverend Carter, his clerical collar crisp and his white hair immaculate, stood before the days where a banner proclaimed St. Mary Mead Reading Room reopened. He cleared his throat, and a hush fell. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his voice warm, "we gather today not only to celebrate our revitalized reading room, but to honor the spirit of community that binds us together." His eyes swept the crowd, pausing momentarily on Miss Marple, as though seeking her unspoken blessing. She offered only a slight nod, her knitting needles still at the edge of the lawn. Mrs. Price arranged the vintage teawares with a fastidious precision that bordered on reverence. Each porcelain cup stood in perfect alignment, saucers beneath them like small moons awaiting the teapot's gentle descent. Mrs. Price's bright smile never faltered, yet her brow bore a faint crease and expression of concentration few would attribute to her otherwise easygoing demeanor. Nearby, her son Toby flitted about, balancing a tray of freshly baked scones, their golden crusts promising a tender crumb. Harper, the church gardener with hands calloused by years of earth and toil, muttered under his breath as he straightened a garland of ivy around the bandstand. His dark eyes, usually fixed upon the soil, flicked up now and then to examine the gathering, as though rehearsing lines in an unspoken play. Miss Marple observed him, noting the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze lingered on Inspector Slack, who, rather inconveniently, had been invited to the ceremony. Inspector Slack, summoned by the vicar at Mrs. Price's enthusiastic insistence, stood by the refreshment table. He was a tall man with a rumpled mustache and a perpetually distracted air, as if his thoughts flitted constantly between the sanctity of tea and the demands of his next case. He accepted a porcelain cup from Mrs. Price, murmured his thanks, and raised the cup to his lips with the practiced caution of one unused to delicate teawares. "You know," he remarked to Mrs. Price, "I've been called away from some interesting matters in London to preside over a tea party." "Oh, but Inspector," Mrs. Price replied, You might find our village matters just as intriguing." She offered him a scone, which he accepted, though with a certain wariness, as though expecting it to explode like a booby trap. Miss Marple smiled inwardly at the exchange. The inspector's unease was not entirely unwarranted. St. Mary Mead, with its ladder-toed cottages and prim hedgerows, was rarely the scene of anything more scandalous than a missing cat or an irate goose. Yet she had learned over time that beneath gentility often lurked resentments that could fester like hidden sores. A murmur rippled through the crowd as Lady Agatha Fleetwood, the local grande dame, swept into view. Her hat, a wide-brimmed confection of velvet and feathers, bobbed as she navigated the throng. She carried a small ivory box clasped to her chest, the contents known to few, though rumors whispered of its antiquity and value. Lady Agatha paused at Miss Marple's side, offering a perfunctory curtsy. "Good morning, dear Miss Marple," she said, her voice tinkling. "Shall I interest you in some elderflower cordial?" "Thank you, Lady Agatha," Miss Marple replied, accepting the glass. "Your gardens have never looked lovelier." She nodded toward the flower beds, where Lady Agatha's prized white lilies competed for attention with a riot of hollyhocks. Lady Agatha's lips curved in a tight smile. "I do hope the reading room's success will reflect the excellence of our village." Her gaze shifted momentarily to Mr. Harper, and Miss Marple's eyes followed. The gardener's jaw tightened, and he shot away from Lady Agatha, wiping his hands on his coat as though removing an invisible stain. A polite cough drew attention back to Reverend Carter, who raised his hand. "Now, before we proceed to the ribbon cutting, a brief word on the history of this room." He gestured toward a small brass plaque affixed to the hall's wall. Miss Marple rose and made her way closer, knitting needles dangling at her side. She liked to review the plaque's inscription often. She found clues hidden in the dedication's wording or in the omissions of names one might otherwise expect. As she read, her mind drifted to the dusty archives she had perused weeks earlier, when she had expressed curiosity about this very room. The ledgers bore entries of donations large and small. A handful of names recurred: the local doctor's family, Lady Agatha Fleetwood. The Price household, yet one donor's name, Cyril Wexford, was conspicuously absent from parish records, and no one in the village seemed to recall such a person. Miss Marple filed the anomaly away, alongside several others, a broken teacup in the vicarage, a furtive glance exchanged between two parish council members, and the queer pause Lady Agatha had taken when Mr. Harper had approached. Reverend Carter's voice pulled her back. "Miss Marple, perhaps you would do us the honor of unveiling the plaque?" The congregation turned, their eyes upon her. She smiled and stepped forward. With gentle precision, she untied a silk ribbon. The scissors glinted in the sunlight, its blades opening to sever the ribbon in one clean cut. A round of applause ensued, and a ripple of chatter followed. People clustered around to read the inscription, in grateful memory of those who nurture both mind and spirit. St. Mary Mead Parish, 2025. Miss Marple lingered at the edge of the gathering, drinking in the scene. The laughter, the bright dresses, the chatter of children, it was all so perfectly ordinary. And yet she knew what she always knew: human nature, under the right provocation, could be as unpredictable and dark as a winter sky. As the crowd drifted toward the tea tables, Miss Marple allowed herself a moment to survey each face. There was Mrs. Price, offering scones with cheerful abandon. Toby, his smile belying a hint of nerves. Lady Agatha, resuming her station by the lilies. Mr. Harper, elbows deep in ivy once more. And Inspector Slack, hesitating before taking a seat. All were actors upon her stage, their roles yet to be revealed. She settled upon a bench beneath the rose arbor, knitting needles resuming their soft clatter. A young woman approached Hermione Ashford, visiting niece of Lady Agatha, her expression bright, but tinged with something Miss Marple could not yet name. The girl offered Miss Marple a cup of tea. "It's Darjeeling," she said. "I thought you might like it." "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple replied, accepting it. She inhaled the delicate aroma. "Very nice indeed." Hermione's gaze flickered to the ivory box at Lady Agatha's side. "That's a family heirloom, isn't it?" she ventured. "An old keepsake," Hermione admitted. "Though I suspect there's more to it than meets the eye." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving the first strands of what would become a far more complex tapestry. "Ah, secrets," she murmured, more to herself than to Hermione. "They have a way of surfacing when one least expects." Hermione smiled nervously and drifted away, joining a cluster of guests whose laughter sounded too bright for such an innocent setting. Miss Marple sipped her tea and looked out over the lawns. Somewhere in that crowd lay motives buried deep: envy, resentment, maybe even fear. Before the day was done, the exquisite calm of St. Mary Mead would be shattered. A teaspoon with a bite mark would come into play, and with it, a hint of violence that no one could have imagined on such a sunlit morning. Miss Marple closed her knitting bag, her needles stilled for a moment. She had all she needed: names, faces, an inexplicable omission from the donor list, and a curious sense that events were not unfolding by chance. She rose to her feet, smoothing her dress, and moved toward the tea tables, where the villagers lined up for second helpings. Each would offer their own theories on the strange hush she had observed in Hermione's smile, on Lady Agatha's tight-lipped watchfulness, and on the gardener's abrupt withdrawal from conversation. But she would listen first. The truth, she knew, would be revealed in the flow of words and the flicker of a glance, and only later, when the tea had turned to blood, would she knit the fragments into the full dark design. Chapter 2. Whispers beneath the linden tree. Be late afternoon. The villagers had dispersed from the crisply laid tables, their linen napkins tucked into reticules or waistcoats, and gathered beneath the shade of the linden tree that arched protectively over the village green. Here the air was cooler, and the light slanted low through the leaves, gilding the faces of those who leaned in to exchange their versions of the morning's events. A gentle breeze stirred petals from the blooming hawthorn, and they fluttered to the ground like pale confetti, lending the scene a fragile, almost festive air, one that belied the undercurrent of tension. Mrs. Price stood at the edge of the group, her hands clasped about her handbag as she recounted her impression of Inspector Slack's manner. "He nearly dropped his teacup when the vicar unveiled the plaque," she declared, voice pitched triumphantly. "I thought for certain he was about to faint." A ripple of laughter followed, though Mrs. Price's tight expression betrayed a hint of unease. Miss Marple, seated on a garden bench nearby, let the conversation wash over her, noting who laughed easily and who offered only polite smiles. "It's all very well for the inspector to pretend our village is quaint," Mr. Willoughby chimed in, adjusting his pince-nez spectacles. "But I couldn't help noticing Lady Agatha's look of displeasure when the name of Cyril Wexford failed to appear. She's far too accustomed to having things her own way." The name, unfamiliar to most, hung in the air like a stray note. Miss Marple's ears pricked, and she made a mental note to inquire further about Mr. Wexford's absence. From parish records, Hermione Ashford, standing close to Lady Agatha's younger sister, Flora, appeared restless, smoothing the pleats of her skirt as she sought reassurance. "It was rather odd, wasn't it?" she murmured. "A reading room dedicated to minds and spirits, yet nobody seems to recall Mr. Wexford at all." Flora's eyebrows rose. "Perhaps he was a modest benefactor," she suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. Hermione shot her a glance that was equal parts doubt and desperation. The spectators around them exchanged wary looks, as though they too doubted Flora's explanation. A murmur grew when Mrs. Coombs, the village postmistress, joined the circle. She carried a small parcel wrapped in brown paper letters for the afternoon collection. and leaned forward conspiratorially. I hear from my cousin in Tunbridge that a Mr. Wexford disappeared rather suddenly from his estate a few years back, she confided, voice low. Scandalous business, involving a broken engagement and a forged letter. The group leaned closer, their faces animated. They said Lady Agatha's brother was involved, Mrs. Coombs added, nodding toward the Grundy dame's imposing mansion on the hill, and that he insisted on wiping all mention of him from the family archives. Lady Agatha herself approached then, steps measured and elegant. The villagers straightened, as though a gentle command had passed through the crowd. She offered a serene nod. I'm afraid family matters are not for public discussion, she said softly, but do enjoy the afternoon delights. The reading room remains open until 5. With that, she swept away, her skirts rustling like moth wings. Miss Marple observed the slight tremor of her gloved hand as she withdrew, and the way her shoulders rose and fell as though she carried a heavy secret. Upon the green, Inspector Slack leaned against the trunk of the linden, surveying the scene with detached curiosity. To his left, Sergeant Peters jotted notes in a small leather notebook. I'd take these rumors with a pinch of salt, the inspector remarked to his subordinate. People here treat gossip as sport, but I admit the Wexford story is new to me. Sergeant Peters glanced up, eyes bright. Perhaps an uninvited guest left more than just rumors behind, he ventured. Inspector Slack shook his head. Let us focus on tangible facts for now. Yet even he could not conceal the momentary flash of interest at the mention of the missing patron. Miss Marple rose from her bench and approached, offering the inspector a gentle curtsy. It's rather lovely here, isn't it? She remarked, lifting her parasol to catch the slanting light. Yet I detect a ripple of unease. Slack inclined his head. We're simply unraveling the threads, Miss Marple. I value your insights, if you'd care to share them. She smiled demurely. I shall, in due course, she promised, returning to her seat. He watched her go, noting how she paused to pick up a fallen teacup and examine its chipped rim before slipping it into her handbag. As the inspector lingered, 2 more figures arrived, Dr. Pritchard, the local physician, and his wife, Cecilia, whose gentle manner concealed a razor-sharp mind. Cecilia greeted Mrs. Price with an embrace while Dr. Pritchard exchanged a few words with Reverend Carter. Miss Marple watched their interactions closely, the doctor's polite tone masking concern, and his wife's quick, observant glances at Lady Agatha's direction. There was a moment a mere heartbeat when Cecilia's gaze flickered to the ivory box, still clasped in Lady Agatha's hands before she turned back with polite calm nearby. The vicar's daughter, Emily Carter, sat cross-legged on the grass, sketching the bandstand in her notebook. Her pencil moved rapidly, and now and then she paused, head tilted, as though trying to capture something beyond the structure, a hidden expression or a stolen glance. Hermione Ashford drifted to Emily's side, peering at the sketch. You've caught the mood perfectly, she said softly. Emily blushed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I just felt there was more to today than meets the eye. Miss Marple rose again and approached the 2 young women. There often is, she said, leaning on her parasol. You see details that many overlook. Emily's eyes widened. Miss Marple, do you think St. Mary Mead could harbor something darker? The older lady's gaze drifted toward the fading bustle of the afternoon. Human nature is as gentle as the lilt of birdsong, and yet, at times, as sharp as a thorn. She replied. Hermione's fingers tightened around her teacup. You don't think someone might have planned something dreadful here today? Emily asked, voice hushed. Miss Marple shook her head slowly. I hope not, but I shall keep my eyes open. She patted Emily's arm and moved on, letting the girls return to their sketches and whispers. As she wandered back toward the tea tables, she catalogued each conversation fragment: the broken engagement, the missing Wexford, Lady Agatha's fleeting tremor, Cecilia Pritchard's observant pause, and Inspector Slack's wary interest. Each was a threadsome fine, some course that might yet weave into a troubling pattern. By 5 o'clock, the reading room had closed its doors, and the villagers began to disperse along winding lanes that led to thatched cottages and mill houses. Some returned to the vicarage for afternoon tea, while others made their way home, murmuring goodbyes that carried undercurrents of speculation. Miss Marple remained beneath the linden, gathering her knitting and letting the last of the guests pass. The sun had slipped lower, and the golden light had given way to a cooler glow. As though the day itself felt the weight of unspoken thoughts, she rose at last, casting the remains of her tea leaves into the grass, a practice she indulged, though she denied it held any mystical power. For her, the ritual was simply an excuse to pause, to listen to the rhythms of nature and the faint echoes of human voices. Today, the voices had spoken of absence, of secrets buried, and of an uneasy sense that the village's placid surface might not withstand the pressure for long. With her knitting safely stowed, Miss Marple set off down the lane toward her cottage, her steps sure and measured. Behind her, the linden tree stood sentinel, its leaves whispering as the breeze deepened. Somewhere in the hush, she caught sight of Inspector Slack's retreating figure, silhouetted against the evening sky. Their investigations had only just begun, and already she felt the first stirrings of a mystery that would reach beyond gossip and polite society. The next day, she mused, would surely bring fresh revelations and perhaps the first hint of something far more sinister than a missing name on a plaque. Chapter 3. The silent teacup. Morning mist curled over the hedgerows as St. Mary Mead stirred awake. In the humble warmth of her cottage kitchen, Miss Marple arranged her teacup and saucer upon the small oak table. The delicate china trembled slightly beneath her fingertips, a disquieting echo of the unease that had settled over the village. She poured piping hot tea into the cup, its steam swirling like a question in the chill air. With a soft sigh, she lifted the cup to her lips, but paused mid-sip, recalling the chipped teacup she had pocketed the day before. That small imperfection so easily overlooked had lodged itself in her mind like a restless sparrow. Across the green, Inspector Slack arrived at the reading room shortly before 9. Briefcase in hand, he found Sergeant Peters waiting, pen poised over notebook. Through the window, he could see Lady Agatha stepping into the porch, her bearing as unyielding as the stone steps beneath her feet. Slack pressed a hand to the glass and watched her pause, glance back toward the garden, and then enter. Their investigations, he reminded himself, must proceed with decorum. A wrong move here would ripple through the genteel circles of St. Mary Mead, like a dropped spoon in fine china loud. Unwelcome and unforgettable. Inside, the reading room smelled of polished wood and old paper. Shelves lined the walls, each book a testament to knowledge patiently gathered over generations. Inspector Slack cleared his throat. "Sergeant, secure the scene. We begin with our friend, Lady Agatha." Sergeant Peters nodded and stepped outside. Slack followed Lady Agatha into the main chamber, where she had already taken a seat upon the upholstered settee. Her posture was impeccable, her gaze steady. Yet to Slack's trained eye, there was tension coiled in her fingers. "Inspector," she said, inclining her head, "I trust your inquiries will be discreet. The reputation of St. Mary Mead depends upon it." "Of course, Lady Agatha," Slack replied, offering a reassuring smile. "But you will understand that a missing or, from what I gather, an erased name on the plaque is a matter of import. We must account for every detail." She drew a slender gloved hand across her throat in a motion of dismissal. "Family matters are not always for public record. I assure you, no foul play was intended." Nevertheless, Slack observed her eyes drifting to the small ivory box resting on the settee beside her. "Might we open it?" It could shed light on the donor list. Lady Agatha's expression flickered, then hardened. I prefer not. The box contains private mementos. I hope you understand. Slack inclined his head, conceding the point for now. He withdrew a small evidence bag from his briefcase and, without ceremony, placed the chipped teacup inside. We start with what we have, he said. Lady Agatha merely watched as he sealed the bag, the sound of the zipper echoing. Meanwhile, Miss Marple strolled along the lane toward the vicarage. She had received Mrs. Carter's kindly invitation to tea, and the prospect of fresh conversation pleased her. The vicar's garden gate greeted her with a tinkling bell, and she stepped through into a wash of snug familiarity. Inside, Reverend Carter bustled about, ranging biscuits on a lace-trimmed plate, while Emily, his daughter, set to teacups upon the tray. "Good morning, Miss Marple," Reverend Carter greeted. "Please, do sit. Emily tells me you have news of interest." Miss Marple smiled demurely and settled into the high-backed chair. "Nothing concrete, I'm afraid, but the story of Cyril Wexford has piqued my curiosity. I wondered if the parish records might reveal more." Emily passed the tea and biscuits. "I looked into it last night," she said, "but there's no mention of him in the official ledgers. If he ever existed, he left no financial trace or someone removed it." Reverend Carter tapped a forefinger on the saucer. "If he was a donor, then there would be a record of his gift. Someone must have altered the documents." Miss Marple accepted a small biscuit. "People often meddle when secrets become uncomfortable." She paused, letting the words hang. "Has anyone spoken to the former archivist, Mr. Harper?" The vicar's brow furrowed. "Mr. Harper, our gardener? He was clerk of records before retiring. Perhaps he knows more." Emily exchanged a glance with her father. "I can speak with him," she offered. Before Miss Marple could reply, a knock sounded. Mrs. Price entered, cheeks flushed. "Excuse the intrusion," she panted, placing a hand on her chest, "but there's been an accident at the Harper estate." Reverend Carter rose. "Good heavens! What sort of accident?" Mrs. Price drew a deep breath. "Mr. Harper was found unconscious in his greenhouse." "Mr. Harper," she faltered. "He's been in that greenhouse all morning tending the new begonias," he said. "A neighbor discovered him on the gravel path, teacup shattered by his side. And no sign of what befell him." Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. "A teacup?" Mrs. Price nodded. "A fine porcelain one much like this." She indicated Miss Marple's cup. "But someone crushed it underfoot. I thought it odd, so I came straight here." Reverend Carter closed his eyes. "Fetch him at once. I shall prepare the carriage within minutes." The vicar's ancient brougham clattered up the lane to the Harper estate. Miss Marple climbed inside beside Mrs. Price, clutching her knitting and watching the hedge-lined road. As the carriage passed beneath towering oaks, she reflected on the morning's revelations: a missing donor, a silenced family heirloom, a gardener incapacitated by a smashed teacup. The pattern was emerging: a teacup as a calling card, perhaps, or a symbol of cruelty disguised as accident. At the greenhouse, sunlight streamed through the glass panes, illuminating rows of fuchsia and begonia. Mr. Harper lay upon a marble bench, eyes closed, his face ashen. Sergeant Peters and Dr. Pritchard stood by his side. The doctor's practiced hand pressed against the gardener's wrist. Dr. Pritchard nodded to Slack. "No sign of a blow, Inspector. His pulse is faint but steady, though he is unresponsive." He paused, glancing at the broken teacup. "It appears someone dropped it intentionally. The fracture patterns suggest force, not a slip." Inspector Slack crouched to examine the shards. "No fingerprints?" he asked. The sergeant shook his head. "I dusted for prints, but only the gardener's. Someone wore gloves." Miss Marple entered quietly, her presence almost a whisper. She knelt beside the teacup fragments, fingering a sharp edge. "A curious placement," she murmured. Here, near the entrance, she pointed to a footprint, a small, dainty sole pressed into the damp gravel, and someone followed up the path, leaving this mark. She scooped a cast and plaster from a satchel she carried. Slack regarded her in surprise. "Miss Marple, you are full of surprises." He helped her to her feet. "Thank you. We will add this to the evidence." Dr. Pritchard straightened. "I think he may recover. But this was no accident." His glance turned to Miss Marple. "A deliberate act, I fear." Silence fell. The greenhouse door swung gently in the breeze, its panes catching the afternoon light. Outside, birds chirped as though nothing untoward had occurred. Yet within the glass walls lay the proof that violence could bloom alongside beauty. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "We must question those who knew his routine best," she said softly. "Begonias are finicky. He would not stray from his watering schedule." She turned to Slack. "Perhaps, Inspector, you might start with Lady Agatha's staff. Someone wearing gloves might have motive." Inspector Slack took out his notebook and tapped his pen. "A sound suggestion. We'll begin interviews at once." He rose, offering his arm to Miss Marple. She accepted, her knitting now stowed. As they left the greenhouse, Emily Carter joined them. Concern etched on her face. "Do you think Mr. Harper will be all right?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "He has a strong constitution, dear, and we shall see justice for him yet." Emily nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the shattered teacup, its porcelain edges gleaming like clues in the dying light. In the hush that followed, Miss Marple reflected on the threads she now held, the donor who vanished, the heirloom sealed away, the gardener silenced by a teacup's crack. Each was a note in a dark symphony yet to resolve, and as she gazed across the dew-speckled gravel, she felt the first true stirrings of certainty that someone in St. Mary Mead would regret ever setting foot in this collision of gentility and guile. Chapter 4. Threads of Suspicion. B. Mid-morning the following day, the Harper Estates staff room had been transformed into an impromptu interview chamber. Inspector Slack sat at a polished pine table, Sergeant Peters at his side, while Miss Marple evaluated each witness with the calm detachment of an experienced observer. The first to enter was Mrs. Dunham, Lady Agatha's housekeeper, whose prim cap and stern expression bespoke decades of service. She carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to authority and to guarding household secrets. "Thank you for coming," Slack began. "We understand Mr. Harper found the teacup shattered and then collapsed. Did you see anything unusual yesterday?" Mrs. Dunham smoothed her black apron. "I saw Mr. Harper in the greenhouse until nearly dusk, tending the begonias as always. He returned to the house for his supper, and later I found his teacup on the dining table." Untouched, her gaze flicked toward Miss Marple, who nodded encouragingly. "I wiped the cup as part of my chores," Mrs. Dunham continued, "but I did not break it. Afterwards, he said he was going back to the greenhouse for a final check." Inspector Slack exchanged a look with Sergeant Peters. "And did anyone else have access to his teacup?" Mrs. Dunham hesitated. "Lady Agatha sometimes uses it when she inspects the greenhouse because she admires the flowers." Her eyes lowered. "She asked me to bring tea to her as she worked." Miss Marple made a small note in her mind. Lady Agatha, gloves, and a chipped teacup in the greenhouse. A subtle pattern emerged, but she withheld comment. The next to enter was cook Mrs. Bingham, whose rosy cheeks belied a quick wit. "Only this," she said pragmatically. "He didn't return for his supper last night." I grew concerned and sent Mrs. Dunham to call him in. When she found the teacup smashed, she rushed to the greenhouse. I joined her and saw him lying there. "And did you notice anyone else on the path?" Slack pressed. "No, sir," Cook replied. "But I did see the vicar's daughter, Emily Carter, slip out of the garden about the same time." She looked troubled. Miss Marple nodded. Emily's preoccupation with sketching yesterday had not escaped her notice. She might know more than she admitted. Inspector Slack thanked Cook and bade her wait for further questions. The door opened once more to admit James, Lady Agatha's footman, tall and nervous. "Inspector." "Miss Marple," he said, bowing. "I did not see Mr. Harper after he returned to the house. I did, however, notice a set of muddy footprints leading from the greenhouse to the servants' wing. I cleaned them up this morning, but I recall they were small, perhaps a lady's shoe." He swallowed. "Forgive me if I overstep." Slack's pencil darted across the notebook. "Thank you, James. Very helpful." The footman retreated, exhaustion and fear in his eyes. Miss Marple filed away his description. Small footprints and gloves. She suspected Lady Agatha's niece, Hermione, whose slippers were delicate enough to leave such marks, and who had been seen near the greenhouse. At odd hours after the staff departed, Slack addressed Miss Marple. "Your turn, miss. Whom would you question?" She tapped her parasol thoughtfully. "Perhaps Emily Carter first. She has a keen eye and may have seen something, even inadvertently." They made their way to the vicarage, where Emily sat at her desk, sketchbook open. Her pencil hovered above a fresh drawing of the greenhouse. She looked up, startled. "Miss Marple." "Inspector." "Good afternoon, Emily," Miss Marple said gently. "May I look at your sketch?" Emily turned the pages to the greenhouse elevation. "I drew this yesterday, to capture the light, but when I finished, I noticed a figure only a silhouette moving behind the glass. I thought it odd, so I erased it." She sighed. "I wish I hadn't." Miss Marple leaned closer. "May I see what you erased?" Emily hesitated, then produced a slightly crumpled sheet. Faint pencil lines formed the outline of a woman's profile, fingers poised above a teacup. The arch of the figure's hat matched one Emily had sketched of Lady Agatha. Inspector Slack's eyes narrowed. "Did you tell anyone?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "I thought it a trick of the light, but now." Her voice trailed off as she looked from Miss Marple to Slack. "I was afraid I imagined it." Miss Marple patted Emily's hand. "You did well to bring this to us. Sometimes the smallest detail holds the greatest weight." As they stepped outside, Emily paused. "Miss Marple, do you think someone meant to harm Mr. Harper?" Miss Marple considered the shattered cup, the unconscious gardener, the hidden sketch. "I believe they intended only to scare him, yet someone underestimated the fragility of both teacup and man," leaving Emily to recover. They next visited Dr. and Mrs. Pritchard at their home overlooking the village green. Cecilia Pritchard greeted them in a neatly kept drawing room. Dr. Pritchard, spectacles perched on his nose, offered tea. "We understand, Doctor, that Mr. Harper's collapse bears no physical wound," Slack began. "Does that suggest a medical cause?" The doctor shook his head. "His vitals are weak, but there is no evidence of poison. The blow, if blow there was, must have been psychological fright severe enough to induce collapse." He looked to Miss Marple. "Miss Marple, you suggested gloves. Do you suspect someone wore them deliberately?" "I do," she replied. "A deliberate breakage of china in the greenhouse, the deliberate erasure of a sketch, and the erasure of a name. From the donor records, these acts point to someone determined to remove evidence." Cecilia frowned. "But who would benefit from Mr. Harper's incapacitation?" Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the window, where a solitary bed of white lilies caught the sunlight. Lady Agatha's pride and joy. Someone who values control over the gardens. Or perhaps someone who resents the gardener's authority. Cecilia shared a glance with her husband. "My brother once quipped that Mr. Harper knew more about our family's fortunes than any solicitor," she said softly. "Perhaps someone wanted that knowledge suppressed." Slack made a note. "Thank you. We shall speak with Lady Agatha again." Their final visit was to Lady Agatha's drawing room. The grande dame received them with calm formality. Lady Agatha's grip on the ivory box was firmer now, as though it protected her. Slack began with the donor list. Lady Agatha conceded that the omission of Wexford's name had been her decision, motivated by shame over a family scandal. Yet she insisted she bore no ill will toward the gardener. Miss Marple observed Lady Agatha's rings, 3 on her gloved fingers, each set with modest gems, and noticed slight discoloration around one band. "Pray forgive my curiosity, Lady Agatha," she said, gently, "but your gloves bear a faint smudge of soil. Did you visit the greenhouse yesterday afternoon?" Lady Agatha's chin lifted. "I strolled among the roses, yes, but I did not break any china." Inspector Slack leaned forward. "Then whose gloves did break the teacup, Lady Agatha?" A moment of silence. Lady Agatha's composure wavered, and for an instant her eyes glistened. A moment's frustration, she whispered. "Mr. Harper refused to display certain flowers in the display parlor. I tapped the cup against the table, and it cracked. I panicked and fled, ashamed." Miss Marple murmured, "Fear has many faces. Yet we must uncover every motive." As they departed, Slack remarked to Miss Marple, "She confessed, but seems sincere. Yet sincerity can mask deeper intentions." Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed. And we still have the box, the sketch, and Mrs. Price's nervous haste. These threads will lead us onward." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the gravel drive. The delicate network of apologies, half-truths, and covert glances had begun to knit itself into a pattern only Miss Marple could yet discern. And though no single confession explained all, each revelation tightened the web around the mystery one that would soon demand an examination. Even the genteel villagers of St. Mary Mead might find uncomfortable. Chapter 5: A Hidden Clue. Late that afternoon, Miss Marple settled at her small writing desk with the day's notes spread before her. Mrs. Dunham's testimony, Cook's account of Emily's furtive departure, James's memory of muddy footprints, and Lady Agatha's remorseful admission. Each had its weight, yet none formed a complete picture. As the light waned outside her cottage window, she rose and fetched the battered leather satchel in which she kept physical evidence. Inside lay the chipped teacup from the greenhouse, a plaster cast of the footprints, Emily's crumpled sketch, and tucked into a folded handkerchief the ivory box. She closed the desk and laid her findings on the table, drawing her knitting chair forward. Miss Marple lifted the teacup and examined it by the glow of her lamp. The chip was jagged, about the size of a thumbnail, and its edges bore a faint brownish tint. She sniffed, detecting an echo of earth soil from the greenhouse path, no doubt. Gently, she traced a finger inside the cup's rim and froze. There, at the back where the glaze had worn thin, was a fine crescent of brown discoloration. It was too regular to be soil. It was the mark of human teeth against porcelain, she murmured. A bite mark. Carefully, she lifted the cup to the light, rotating it. The crescent smudge curved like the imprint of an incisive nibble. No break in the porcelain where teeth might have cracked it further. Someone had bitten the rim deliberately. A small act, yet revealing much, impatience, perhaps, or stress. A statement of ownership, even defiance. Miss Marple set the cup aside and opened the ivory box. Inside lay a single teaspoon, slender, silver, its handle adorned with an engraved swirl. The bowl of the spoon bore a small indentation, too neat to be accidental, and at its edge, a corresponding brown mark, faint but unmistakable. The teaspoon had the same bite-marked crescent and residue of something dark, perhaps, the remnants of tea, or, given its hue, a touch of jam. She pressed a gloved fingertip to the spoon's edge and tasted the residue. Not jam, but dried Darjeeling leaves. She recalled that Hermione Ashford had offered her Darjeeling the day of the garden party, but she had used her own cup, not the spoon. The villagers had assumed the ivory box contained purely sentimental items. No one suspected it held a common teaspoon. Yet here it was, and someone had bitten it. Miss Marple arranged the teacup, the teaspoon, and the sketch of Emily's erased figure on the table. The crescent smudges on both china and silver were identical in shape and tone. Whoever had taken Lady Agatha's heirloom teaspoon into the greenhouse must have bitten its rim to steady a nervous hand. This implied a personal connection to the box, someone permitted to handle it. And anxious enough to need a tactile anchor. Next, Miss Marple unfolded Emily's sketch. Beneath the drawn profile, smudges of charcoal and erasures obscured the figure's lower half. She took her penknife and carefully scraped away the charcoal dust, revealing more of the woman's hands, one resting on a teacup, the other curled beneath the brim of her hat. The position matched neither Lady Agatha's nor Hermione's habitual posture, but Emily's journal entries had described Flora's gestures precisely. Yet the hat's ribbon, as faint as pencil allowed, was dark blue, the exact shade of Emily Carter's favorite straw bonnet, which Miss Marple had seen her wearing the previous day. She paused to set the sketch beside the teaspoon. The hand's fingers were slender and tapered. A woman's hand, not Mrs. Dunham's working fingers or cook's sturdy grip. She remembered James's remark, small footprints, a lady's shoe. The clues converged, a spoon, a cup, a silhouette, all implicating Emily Carter. But why? Emily had no clear motive. Her family held no rancor with Harper. Perhaps she had witnessed something and feared discovery. Miss Marple washed the teaspoon in warm water, wiping it with a soft cloth until the brown mark persisted in its crescent form. Then she tapped the spoon's handle gently against the teacup's rim. The tone resonated, a clear, muted chime. She repeated the action, listening. The cup answered with a higher pitch. The two sounds, when paired, reminded her of tuning forks' distinct frequencies that harmonized. A subtle detail, but significant. The teaspoon and the chipped teacup were a deliberate set, used together in some repeated ritual, not merely instruments of tea, but tokens of a private interaction. At that moment, a soft knock sounded at her door. Miss Marple gathered the item